What's up guys, and welcome to a new video of mine. I have finally found a better build to play in the post-patch 1.1.1 meta, after Poison got nerfed quite significantly due to the bug fix with bursting venoms. I finally found a new tier 100 speed clear build, which I just recently had a very impressive sub 3 minutes clear on Bastion of Faith, and from the testing that I did yesterday and the day before, I actually found it that is very consistent in speed clearing tier 100s, mostly sub 5 minutes, and I think you guys are gonna like it quite a lot. And let's get right into it. So the general idea of this build is we are using Barber. Yes, every build is using Barber now in the post-patch meta. Barber is really strong, and we're using it in combination with Frostbitten and Cold Barber. For the skills, we have a quick overview. We are using Poison Trap because Poison Trap is really strong. It gives us defensive options such as access to debilitating toxins, which reduces incoming damage quite a bit. And we also can use Poison Trap to proc the Trickery Heart, and the clone is really helpful because the clone does not have health anymore. And it does taunt all of the mobs onto the clone, which really helps with survivability against ranged mobs as well. Then we're using Shadow Step as we know it for the CC break and the stun. This is really nice because you're also using Aspect of Surprise, which lets us then drop grenades onto the enemy if we Shadow Step right in place, for example. And then we have Dash for the increased mobility and the multiplicative increase in critical strike damage. That really helps with Barber damage, so Dash is a very strong option here. We also use Cold Imbuement to gain the bonus against frozen enemies. And then we use Puncture because Puncture is the best basic skill, and obviously Twisting Blades because that is the best thing to use with Barber as well, especially with combo points. So you might ask yourself, okay, why are we not using Smoke Grenade? We're not using Smoke Grenade because we use the Aspect of Surprise. Aspect of Surprise leaves behind stun grenades whenever you Shadow Step or evade. Do note that it does leave the grenades at the place where you started the Shadow Step or started the evade, so you have to be on the enemy that you want to stun with the nades when you do it. We use these nades because once enemies are chilled by Pentitent Greaves, they then get frozen instantly by our grenade skills. The chance is double our critical strike chance. Our critical strike chance is, as you can see here, 42.2%. That's not quite 50%, but we're using Poison Trap, and Poison Trap gives us access to the Trap Mastery skill, which then increases our critical strike chance to 54.4%, which means we have double the chance above 100%. So it's a guaranteed freeze once a stun grenade hits a chilled enemy. That's what makes Poison Trap so good in this build as well. Yeah, and that's why we're using Smoke Grenade. We don't have to. We have a reliable stun grenade with Surprise. And yes, Smoke Grenade does have a 20% multiplier. But we don't need that because we get a 15% multiplier to critical strike damage from Dash. That's more than enough, and also Dash gives us more mobility in the dungeon itself. Combo Points is super strong because Combo Points gives us more damage for our Twisting Blades. It also gives us movement speed. If we use more than 1 point, if we use more points, we gain more movement speed. That's very strong. When you're leveling and you're below level 50, it's fine to use Inner Sight, but once you get access to the combat glyph, for example, and resource generation on the rings, you don't have to play Inner Sight anymore. Swap to combo points, it's going to be a lot better. Right, now you might ask yourself, okay, but what second Barber should I use? Should I use 2 seconds? Should I use 3? Should I use 4? Well, for general mobbing, the best Barber to use is something between 2.2 seconds and 3 seconds, because then you get a lot of value out of it, and it's usually enough to kill the mobs before they become unstoppable. And the damage is just fine during this time window. And you don't want to go over it because then the mobs might not be CC'd anymore. So 2.2 seconds to 3 seconds is absolutely ideal. For bosses, you want to use 4 seconds. And we do also, in this build, play 2 items on swap because that makes bosses insanely fast. Like literally deleting them in the first stagger. You stagger the boss in about 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. And then you delete him instantly during the stagger if you have 2 items on swap. That is this neck, for example, a neck with either Weapon Mastery or Frigid Finesse. Some sort of damage rolls on there. I took Dexterity and Flat Damage. Energy cost reduction is also good in place of flat damage, and cooldown reduction to get your stuff ready faster. And the most important thing is to have a higher second Barber on here, so you have a bigger time window to deal damage, which then gets amplified by Barber. And that makes the boss basically explode instantly. And once he's staggered. And it's important to imprint Aspect of Retribution here. That gives us another 30% damage multiplier, and that makes the damage absolutely insane. I personally have seen crits of up to 80 million. I think I even saw 90 or 100 million once in other builds as well. So definitely a strong option. And the second swap item that you have to take into consideration is a ring with an orange socket for the Vicious Heart of Tempting Fate. That massively increases your damage against the boss, especially if you also have Inner Calm imprinted on this. You do swap out the ring with Surprise and Tempting and the Trickery Heart here. We do not need the Trickery Heart and the Surprise aspect for the boss once he's staggered. So basically what you do is you go into the boss fight, you hit him a couple of times with Puncture and all of your other skills, and don't use Twisting Blades too much. To stagger him before he is below 80% health. That is very important because while he's above 80% health, we do get the bonus from Weapon Mastery, which lets us deal increased multiplicative damage against healthy enemies. That's very important, so stagger him before the boss before the boss goes below 80% health. And then we swap in the Amulet, we swap in the ring for the Surprise ring, and then you hammer away at the boss, and you will see insane crits flying on your screen, and the boss is usually dead during the first stagger with that method. So now let us get into the gear. I do have the stat priority sheet linked on this side. Yep, it's right up there. And there you can also see what stats are important. The stats are sorted by the order of importance, so the stat higher up is more important than the stat lower down. So for the helmet, we want to use all stats. We want to use total armor, maximum life, and cooldown reduction. Total armor is one of the most important stats in this build. I have the breakpoint listed there as well. You want to reach 9,850 armor is the breakpoint, I think. I'm just slightly below it right here. Because with that breakpoint and a max roll disobedience on the neck, you do get to the armor breakpoint for 13k armor, which is the armor that you need to take the minimum amount of possible damage from level 154 mobs, which is the mob level in a tier 100 dungeon. So if you don't have at least 9,500 armor, I do suggest using an armor potion to get as high armor as you can. Don't go over 9,850. That's not necessary because any armor above that will not benefit you. So have this 9,850 armor unbuffed, and then use Disobedience max roll on the neck to gain the maximum amount of possible total armor. On the chest, we have very usual rolls, just total armor, damage reduction from close enemies, and distant enemy damage reduction. That's very important to have all of these four here. Distant damage reduction is especially important because ranged mobs will be very, very difficult to deal with in this build, unless you have good defenses, so keep an eye out to have your defenses high. A high roll total armor is much, much preferred, and we're obviously using rubies in the armor to get the most out of them. The gloves are fairly standard, to be honest, just ranks of Twisting Blades. Critical strike chance is the most important skill after that, then attack speed, and then lucky hit chance. Unfortunately, my gloves here are a little bit low on the attack speed roll, but maybe I'll find some new ones soon. We're using this is the most important aspect in this build, the Frostbitten aspect. It is absolutely mandatory to have this aspect to play this build properly. If you don't have that, do not switch to this build yet, try to get one first. What this thing does is chilled enemies that are hit by our grenade skills, I explained a little bit of that in the opening of the video, have a chance equal to double our critical strike chance to be instantly frozen for 2 seconds. Double our critical strike chance with Trap Mastery is above 100% because 42% plus 12% is more than 50%, and 50% times 2 is 100%. So once we have Trap Mastery active, we do have a 100% chance to freeze enemies with our grenade skills, and they then take increased critical strike damage from us once they are frozen. What that means is you engage the enemy with dash, for example, to drop the poison trap. Once the trap is active, you gain Trap Mastery. Then you evade or shadow step through or onto the enemy. The grenades drop, it gets frozen, you activate Cold Imbuement, and you deal insane amounts of damage, and the mob is dead once Barber explodes. So for the pants, we're using pants with the implicit maximum life barrier. That is really important to have, especially when dealing against damage over time effects. You can let the damage over time effects tick down until you are injured. Then use the potion, you gain a barrier. That barrier eats some of the damage over time damage. Very important, very helpful. Don't sleep on that. Then we have total armor, damage reduction from distant enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, and flat damage reduction. All four here are very important to have, especially a high roll max armor is very, very important for this build because we need to get as close as we can to the armor breakpoint. We're using Might here. Might is good because we're using Puncture a lot, so Might is going to be very helpful with damage reduction in general. On the chest we had Umbrus, because we still do a lot of basic attacks. Umbrus gives us a little bit of leniency with our engagements because we usually end up with more stacks of Dark Shot at the end of the engagement, which helps us with the upcoming engagement because we don't get one shot by any hard-hitting incoming hits that are coming our way while we're engaging. And on helmet we had Chant Misery. For the boots we're using Penitent Greaves. Penitent Greaves are mandatory for this build because we want to chill the enemies and use the chill from Penitent Greaves to then be able to stun the enemies with our Shadow Step or evade from the surprise aspect. If you do not have Penitent Greaves, which is obviously not a problem, do use Caltrops with the chill upgrade, take the points out from dash, and take 1 point out of rapid gambits and put that into methodical caltrops. For the weapon, we are using an accelerating crossbow. Crossbows are still good, even though the vulnerable damage got nerfed, it's fine. We use the most important stat here is all stats to hit the breakpoints. The breakpoints of the gear that you need are listed below as well, on top as well. And we want all stats, vulnerable damage, critical strike damage, and dexterity. Then we use the accelerating aspect because we want to increase our attack speed further. We use emeralds in the weapons because we want to increase our critical strike chance as much as we can. We don't have to use Bladedancer on the crossbow. Accelerating gives us more value for all of our procs. It gives us more value for siphoning strikes, for Umbrus, for proccing Innovate. It's really, really strong. It is obviously a little bit less damage than the Bladedancer aspect under perfect conditions, but you're not going to hit with the twisting blades that are rotating around you all the time, for example, and attacking faster. Also increases your attack animation. You get faster attacks in between, faster time to stack your combo points. It's very, very helpful. It is slightly less damage than Bladedancer would be, but the added utility is massive, and do not sleep on it. Use it on a crossbow, put Bladedancer on the ring, it's fine. Right, for the amulet, we do use an amulet with Disobedience. As I explained earlier, Disobedience gets us to the armor cap of 13,000 against mobs of level 154. That is really, really important. Try to get a max roll Disobedience on your necklace, and do get an armor roll that is as high as you can on it too. I do have 6.6% here. I'd really love to have more than that to get just over the breakpoint of 9,850. If you get an amulet with just a low roll armor, it's still usable. Don't worry too much about it, but it's not ideal. We do use 3 ranks of Weapon Mastery. 3 ranks of Frigid Finesse is also fine. They are absolutely equal in terms of damage when the enemy is healthy and frozen. Under not ideal conditions, Frigid is slightly better because sometimes the enemies are not healthy anymore, and then you don't get the bonus from Weapon Mastery. So, in an ideal scenario, given that you can reliably freeze the enemies, which we can do quite well in this build, Frigid is slightly better than Weapon Mastery, but the damage is very, very close. It's fine to use either. Energy cost reduction is super important, especially if you don't have 2 resource generation rolls on the rings. That massively helps you with sustaining your energy in general, and I do suggest having that on. If you don't have it, then you might run into energy issues a little bit. Not as much if you have 2 resource generation rolls on your rings, but you'll definitely notice a difference. Total armor is absolutely mandatory on the neck. There's no way around it. You always want to use a total armor on the neck if you want to survive in tier 100, especially since we're playing close quarters combat and not momentum. Total armor is very, very important here, so definitely try to be on the lookout to get at least total armor and the 3 ranks of Weapon Mastery or Frigid on your neck if you want to use it. For the last roll, I do have movement speed here. Movement speed is not ideal. Movement speed is fine to use. Ideally, you would either want to have flat damage reduction or cooldown reduction here. Movement speed is fine to use. The other ones are not as important. Flat damage reduction does help a little bit with survivability. If you're not armor capped, for example, that's very good to use. But movement speed is also fine. Helps you get through the dungeon a little bit faster. Helps you move out of stuff faster. It's just nice utility. Bladedancer Circle. We use Bladedancer here because, as I explained earlier, we use accelerating on the crossbow. We use critical strike chance. Very important to have that as high as possible for the Frostbitten aspect. Critical strike damage, resource generation, also really important to have, and vulnerable damage. But you do use the Brutal Heart of Revenge. That is extremely important to have the 20% damage reduction. And the damage from Heart of Revenge is negligible. We only want it for the damage reduction. On the other ring, we use resource generation. Or again, critical strike chance, having that high here is super, super important. Vulnerable damage, and I do have lucky hit chance here. Critical strike damage would be better. So, we use Aspect of Surprise. I talked a little bit about Surprise already. If you evade or Shadow Step, you leave grenades at the point behind where you started the animation. So if you Shadow Step throughout the whole screen to another mob, the grenades will appear where you started and not where you land. That is important to note. So that means you usually want to dash into a pack and maybe jump out of the pack with Shadow Step once you have enough damage dealt already. You will get a feeling for this. This will make the build very, very fast. Or you just evade through the enemy, and then obviously while you were standing before him, the nades are going to drop onto the enemy and it will be frozen. So Aspect of Surprise is the reason we are not using Smoke Nade. It's not necessary to use Smoke Nade. I personally found it a lot more fluid to play with Surprise. But do note, when we play Aspect of Surprise, dungeons with the nudging evade affix are very, very difficult because you will push the enemies away with the evade before the stun grenades will hit them. So if you face that, like I did in my last video, for example, try to focus on shadow stepping the elite while you're standing in front of it already to make sure the nades get onto them. We do use the Heart of Trickery here, the Brutal Heart. This is extremely important for this build. I would never trade it for cluster munitions because the Shadow Heart of Decoy is so good, as in it taunts ranged mobs. The clone does not have health anymore, so it lasts until the duration expires, which is massively important for this build. I cannot stress how good it is in this build. You always want to use that. There's no way around it. It's so good to keep ranged mobs in place. Get them all bundled up together. You can then just pop the stun grenades onto them. They all get frozen. They all blow up. Absolutely amazing. Insane value from this. Super important while clearing. Absolutely recommend using Trickery. For the weapon, we have Condemnation. Condemnation is obviously the best in slot weapon for this build. We're using combo points. The damage we deal with Twisting Blades is amplified by the Condemnation aspect. If you have a good rolled Condemnation, do use it. It's super good. 40% more damage multiplicative is absolutely nuts. No other aspect can get close to that. We also want to use Daggers in this build because we benefit from the Weapon Mastery aspect of damage well as healthy. The aspect from the swords would just be a flat damage increase is not as great because with Barber, mobs are usually at above 80% health when we engage them. They become immune, so the health damage is applied to them. And that makes Daggers very strong on this build in general. And also the faster attack speed and damage to close enemies is more valuable than the slower attack speed from swords with a little bit of critical strike chance increase. If you do not have Condemnation, you can use a dagger with the rapid aspect, with the same stats as the other dagger, which is also linked above me. For the second dagger, we want to use a dagger with all stats. This is very important to hit the Paragon breakpoints. Vulnerable damage, critical strike damage. I do not have this here, but whatever you have, just use it. And dexterity. We do use the aspect of Expectant, which is really good because we usually weave in a puncture or two in between of our Twisting Blades, especially since we're attacking really fast with close quarters combat and accelerating. Sometimes we do use 2 punctures or even 3 because the animation is really fast, which then gives us another 30% damage increase multiplicative, and that's very strong. We use Puncture, Fundamental Puncture, and the Puncture that applies vulnerable. Puncture is the best basic skill, no way around it. Twisting Blades were with the Daze upgrade, really strong. We want to use Daze to make enemies CC it faster. We want to use Daze for the knockdown from concussive and then use trick attacks. Very strong, very important. The cooldown reduction from Twist Advanced System Blades is negligible. Daze is better, take it. We use Sturdy to gain close damage reduction, very important. Siphoning Strikes. Siphoning Strike got buffed, it's really good. Do use it, I do recommend using it. We have quite a bit of attack speed and a decent amount of health, so that makes Siphoning Strikes really strong in this build as well. Then we use Shadow Step with a stun. Weapon Mastery. 3 points into Weapon Mastery and 3 other points from our Amulet. Weapon Mastery is quite strong here. It gives us 30% increased damage to healthy enemies per dagger. So that's 60% in total, which is why it is about equal with Frigid Finesse. Really strong to use, but Frigid Finesse is fine too. Then we take Dash with the Enhanced Dash upgrade for more critical strike damage. Then we also use Rapid Gambits. I put 2 points into this because I really like being able to use the Evade faster. That helps with Surprise. You can also put 3 points into it if you drop a point from Debilitating Toxins, for example. But I think 2 points is the absolute sweet spot. It works perfectly fine. And also, we need the Daze upgrade from Twisting Blades to make this good. So make sure to pick the Daze upgrade, because then you get the full benefit from Rapid Gambit. Then we have Concussive and Trick Attacks. Very important, very strong. Points in Dark Shroud, because we use Umbrus, and then we get the bonus movement speed from Dark Shroud and the chance for the Dark Shroud to not be consumed. Very nice as well. We use Poison Trap, because we want access to Debilitating Toxins for more damage reduction. And we want to use Poison Trap for the knockdown. We're also using the Deadly Ambush board, which makes Poison Trap spring faster. That is very strong. And it gives us a lot of defensive aspects. And the good thing is here, Poison Trap is a subterfuge skill, which means that we can drop the decoy, we can proc the decoy clone with Poison Trap. Very strong, do recommend. Then we have 3 points in Exploit, because we are dealing with healthy enemies all the time. Then we have 1 point in Deadly Venom to get access to Debilitating Toxins. Very strong here to get 15% less incoming damage from poisoned enemies. That damage reduction applies before our damage reduction from armor and our damage reduction rolls comes in. So very, 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 very good to have that. One of the biggest reasons why we use Poison Trap in this build, as in addition to the decoy clone. Really strong, make sure you have 3 points into it. 1 point at chemical advantage. More attack speed is always nice, and we do get quite a few poisoned enemies usually when we engage a pack with Poison Trap. Then we play 3 points in Frigid Finesse. As I said here, you can also use an Amulet with 3 points in Frigid. Very strong. We get 60% total bonus with +6 against frozen enemies. Really strong. One of the best things to do with Frostbitten. Use that as well. Then we have Cold Imbuement. More points of the Cold Imbuement would not help the damage. It would just increase the chill effect. We don't need that because we basically instantly freeze anyway. And we do take the upgrade that have a chance to make them vulnerable. Nice and handy. But the best thing we use for Cold Imbuement is absolutely the Mixed Cold Imbuement, because with that we deal 20% increased damage multiplicative against crowd-shot enemies, and then another bonus doubled on top of that for frozen enemies. So with 6 ranks of Rigid and Mixed Cold Imbuement, we will be dealing 40%, and then another 60% multiplicative on top as bonus damage to frozen enemies. Absolutely mental. Make sure the enemies are frozen, and then you will deal insane amounts of damage to them. Then we use 3 points in Innovation, because that's really strong to gain energy back. We do need a little bit of energy to maintain our energy with a high attack speed in this build. 3 points in Trap Mastery. I explained this earlier, because Trap Mastery gives us 12% more critical strike chance. And with the 42% critical strike chance we already have, we go to over 50% here. Obviously, there's a bit of leniency if you don't have perfect rolls. So Trap Mastery is really, really strong here. I do recommend playing it. It gives you massive value, and it makes sure that the enemies are frozen instantly from Frostbitten once you drop the grenades on them. Very strong. 1 point in Adrenaline Rush to enable us 3 points into Haste. Very strong, moving faster with full energy and attacking faster while below 50% energy. Really cool, really strong. So, and then we come to the big question. Why would I play Close Quarters Combat in this build? The mob density got increased, mobs hit really hard, I don't have enough armor, all these things. Close Quarters Combat is absolutely massive in terms of damage. It's sort of a 40 to 50% damage increase depending on the scenario you're facing, compared to Momentum, for example, or to Exposure, obviously. I personally do recommend to play Close Quarters Combat. Close Quarters Combat does make you a little bit less tanky than playing Momentum, but if you learned this build correctly and you have good uptime on freeze and you know how to position yourself correctly and you don't stand in explosions, which you generally shouldn't do, then Close Quarters Combat will benefit you a lot more than Momentum. Obviously with Momentum you would have a little bit more room for error, but you will also deal less damage. If you feel extremely squishy and you can't survive for the hell of it, then definitely go momentum and try to get your defenses up, try to get the remaining armor rolls that you're missing, get some armor pots or use anything else until you then can play close quarters combat again. It's very strong. I do recommend playing close quarters combat. Get used to it. It will massively increase your clear speed in dungeons. I did craft a new Paragon board for this build as well. It is quite similar, that board, to the poison board that you all know and love. And in this Paragon board, you can see we did change a few things, but some stuff will be familiar to you. So on the starting board, we're using Devious to boost up all the rare nodes here that give us armor, for example, and flat damage. The flat damage is not as important as in the poison imbuement build, but the armor is very strong because we have to get to the breakpoint. As you can see here, I do have 540 intelligence, which is exactly enough to get to the breakpoint. And then I have 614 strength, which is also exactly enough to get to the breakpoint. If you don't have enough strength and intelligence, you can pick up, you can like remove this magic node here, for example, or this armor node, and then put points into intelligence or strength here. You can also remove some of these nodes. Basically, make sure to get these breakpoints because these are important. To get Lawless, for example, another 175 armor once you have Pride on level 15, on level 21. Very strong, very important. And 540 intelligence is required to get another 25% damage to healthy enemies. Very strong, very important. And here, 530 is required to get another 20% flat damage. Very important, very strong. I do heavily recommend getting that. Alright, from the starting board, we move into the second board, which is the same as in the poison build. Nice, so you don't have to change that if you're coming from poison. We use Diminish here as well for the increase in core skill damage and the armor. Very strong again, will give us access to reduce damage from vulnerable enemies, also very important. And from Cunning Stratagem, we then move into the cheap shot board. Hey, the cheap shot board was also on the poison imbuement build. Nice, so you can keep using that, it's even rotated the same way. We go down here to pick up the damage to healthy enemies. That's very important, obviously, when you're fighting stuff with Barber, because usually enemies are healthy. We pick up Wilds and Devious here for the increased damage to crowd control enemies and the damage reduction from slowed enemies. Puncture does slow, so that's very important. We use Closer here to get more bonus damage from cutthroat skills, but the most important thing we get out of Closer here is while wielding a melee weapon, we get 10% reduced damage. Very important, very strong. We move here to the legendary node to pick that up. We do crowd control enemies quite regularly, so that's very strong for us. Then we pick up the damage to crowd control enemies here from Oppress, and also the critical strike damage to crowd controlled, which is a total of 45% here. Very strong. Do not sleep on this. If you have the points, then definitely get that early. We have Safeguard here for damage reduction from elites and also the additional armor. Then we move up to Exploit Weaknesses. Hey, that was also in the Poison Imbuement build. So you see, it's starting to see a pattern here, I think. Where we socket in Control. Control gives us more damage against frozen enemies and additive damage to crowd control enemies. Quite strong. We pick up the vulnerable damage here. Then we move all the way to the right for another vulnerable damage and damage to injured enemies. Damage to injured enemies is not as important here, but we are pathing through it anyway, so it's nice to pick it up. And then we have damage reduction from vulnerable enemies too, and pick up the armor here as well. Then we move into No Witnesses first. No Witnesses is rotated now, so we move in from this side. Take Ruin for the increased critical strike damage and damage to healthy enemies. Very nice to have. Move into the socket, get Knowledge for the damage, and we socket in combat here. Combat is strong. We want to increase our critical strike damage, and restoring energy from our skills at critical strike is also really nice. And as we have more critical strike chance, due to Trap Mastery as well, we do crit regularly, that restores energy. Once we finish that up, we move to the side from Exploit Weaknesses into Tricks of the Trade. I think Tricks of the Trade is rotated now though, so you would have to respec that if you're coming from Poison too. We do pick up Focused, we don't go for the bonus here. Another 16% damage to elites is not worth it for the huge investment in intelligence that would take us. We put in Pride here, so Pride is really important, really interesting. Any physical damage that we deal to healthy enemies is increased by 13% multiplicative, and also the injured enemy damage. So in this build, there's obviously times where you don't cold imbue your twisting blades, so that comes in very handy. And Pride gives us bonus to our all of our nodes, magic and rare. if they are of physical nature. Armor is of physical nature, so Pride buffs this armor, this armor, this armor from Lawless that we need 610 strength to get, and this armor. So Pride gives us a total of 261 armor as well, which is very strong and does help us getting closer to that armor breakpoint that we really want to achieve of 9,850. Very, very strong to socket and Pride. You guys probably don't have Pride leveled, but I heavily recommend leveling this glyph because it is very strong in this build. Then we move all the way down into our last board, which is Deadly Ambush. We do take Deadly Ambush Legendary Note because another multiplicative increase to critical strike damage affected by trap skills is very strong with all of the other critical strike multipliers that we already have. We'll deal absolute massive amounts of damage to enemies that are affected by trap skills with this. It's very strong with Barber. I do recommend picking that up as well. And here we socket in the Exploit glyph, which gives us more vulnerable damage and obviously makes enemies vulnerable for the first time we hit them. So this glyph is making enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. That means the optimal Barber time is either slightly below that or exactly 3 seconds. So in general, I recommend 2.5 seconds to 2.8 seconds. That's basically the sweet spot for Barber. Because that makes sure that vulnerable will still be on the target once Barber explodes. And we also pick up Spring Loaded here to just make our traps pop faster. 0.5 seconds reduced arm time is very strong. You can engage with Terror Step, drop the trap, and then the mobs will be instantly knocked down. Very strong, do recommend.